Alafia, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. Actually, we had a part one to this show. It's called Arrested Development, and this is part two, Arrested Development, and this part is called Know Thy Addiction. And before I introduce my guest, I just want to remember to mention some of the supporters of this program, because without supporters we would not be able to continue to do these wonderful interviews. I needed to say some names, and I hope that they are watching, and I wanted to mention artist Felicia Grant Preston and my dear, dear friend Juanita Passmore, my good buddy out at Reliable Alarm, Julian Bratton, my place son, Cam Sherman Howard, and my former dentist, Dr. Louis Baskins. There are others whose names I will mention on subsequent shows, but I just wanted to let them know that I deeply appreciate their support, and I wanted to let you know that there are some people who are helping us to bring these programs to you. Now we have to get down to a subject that it has no bottom. It is fathomless. And I thought that I could have one show about addiction, but I found that we had merely scratched the surface because we had not even approached it from a spiritual perspective. And today in the studio, I have two people who can help us to do that. And I'd like to introduce them. I'd like to introduce Pastor William T. Johnson, Jr., and he is from Repairs of the Breach Ministries, and in a moment I'm going to ask you to elaborate on the concept. And then Sebamurti Gentry, who's founder and CEO of SIA Foundation. We want to explore addiction and look at some aspects of it that are not usually considered in a medical model. And so if I may just start with you, Pastor Johnson, if you will just talk to us about your ministry and how you came to have it.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show and giving me the opportunity to raise the issue of addiction in the manner that I believe God has given me to deal with it in. It is not being dealt with specifically in the manner that I think it should be in the church. We have people sitting in churches on Sunday mornings totally immersed in addiction unknowingly. They figure because they don't get it off the corner or they're not ripping and running the streets purchasing drugs that they don't know that they are addicted. You just drive through Walgreens now. You don't even have to get out of the car. But you take drugs to go to sleep, take drugs to wake up, take drugs to eat, take drugs to keep from eating. Take drugs if you're mad, take drugs if you get too excited. And it comes to a point to where you're dependent but thinking it's all right because you're not getting off the corner. Addiction is bondage, is slavery. And at Repairs of the Breach, our mission statement comes out of Isaiah 58, where it talks about the true purpose of the church. There is a gap that has been broadened between the church and the community because of a lot of religious activity. Nowhere in the Bible do I find religiosity being pushed as a way of expressing who God is and what we are to do as being His children. It talks about religiously attending to widows and orphans, and that's it. People have a lot of customs and traditions that they get into, and they try to make this the connection to build a relationship with God. And in the process of this, there's been a lot of fraudulent activities, They have taken spirituality, formalized it, dogmatized it, stigmatized it, turned it into cold-blooded hustlerism. And so people see the ideal of God as being a joke. There's a connection that has been broken between man and God, and all sorts of spiritual sicknesses have entered in as a result of that. And we believe at Repairs of the Breach that God has raised us up for such a time as this. I have no interest in any political platforms. I have no interest in any financial gains or material gains, so I have no fear of addressing this thing from a perspective where it might not be appreciated, or where I would harness what I say about it, because I'm watching the black community go under when God has given us. There's people who are part of Repairs of the Breach. God has given us a charge, and He has empowered us to raise the dead, people who are immersed in drug addiction, that sit under the directions and the leadership of the people that are in this particular ministry. If they do what we transmit to them to do, that they will come out of drug addiction. Through the power of God empowering us to do this. I'm not boasting on myself or the people that God has given me, but I have fruit that bears witness to what I'm saying. You see, there is a point in addiction where a man or a woman enters in and they are able to pull back from it sometimes. But there's a point that you enter in and you go beyond this point to where your own human will, your own human intelligence, you cannot pull back. You've gone over into another realm where it becomes a spiritual problem. When I say a spiritual problem, it's lodged in the mind to where you lose the ability to differentiate the truth from the false. You began to go into something what they try to term it as denial, but that's putting it light. The mind has been blinded. The Bible puts it, you have ears, but you can't hear. You got eyes, but you can't see. And when the individual crosses over into that particular realm, then his mind has to be changed. And then unless the mind is changed, the behavior cannot change. You can be aware of what's going on. You can know with a certainty just how it is happening, but you don't have what's necessary within yourself. Your own human resources will fail you. God has given us only 3 human resources that we use in the natural realm to handle natural problems, like our eating and our housing and our material gain, our intellectual, our material, and our financial. Those are our resources. If we go to school, we go to school to get educated, to get a good job in order to get some finances where we can get some material comfort. All our efforts in the natural are for the material, the financial, and then we use our intelligence. But there are situations in life that human resources won't come up against and solve. You could take an individual who is on drugs and has crossed that point that I'm speaking of. If he obtains a lot of money, he only uses more. And if he obtains a lot of material wealth, when his finances is gone, he only takes his material and sell it to replace what he don't have financially. And then he can take his intelligence and make an assessment of what's going on in this addiction, and it would be accurate, it would be right. But that is not enough to stop him from using over and over again. Unless the mind is changed, there's a spiritual problem, and you cannot solve a spiritual problem with natural resources. And that's why you have people like Mel Gibson. He's got money. If he didn't ever have a dime after Passion of the Christ, he had enough money to burn up the state. You got people like Lizzie Lohan, Paris Hilton. They got money up to, listen, they got it. But they don't have what's necessary. All their human resources will not enable them to come out of that addiction because they have gone past that point. The point that it's called the point of no return. You cannot get back on your own unaided will unless the mind is changed. Psychiatry can't change your mind. See? And the way I'm speaking now is not popular, and it stays under attack. But what keeps it standing is that I have proof of the little bit that I do know about this thing. I know it. And how I know it? Because it has been bearing fruit. 85% of my church is people who've been brought out of bondage, drug addiction. And they only know a little, and then we only know a little. Man himself likes to prance around a pretentious, puny power that he does not have. Intelligence looked at people who were deeply embedded in drug addiction in the manner that I'm speaking of, and here's what they said. After years of studying those type of people, rather than to admit that they were at the end of their intelligence, here's what they said. Once a dope fiend, always a dope fiend. But see, what's humanly impossible is spiritually possible. God has no ending. Where man stopped, God continues. See? And so they keep trying to, they're admitting themselves that treatment doesn't work. Treatment, the word treatment has a lot of definitions. But one definition that it has that fit the situation is handled. When people go to treatment, they're being handled. They're not being healed. See? They tell you what time to get on the phone, what time to get off. They tell you when we're going to dinner, when we're going to rec, when we're going to do this. You're being handled. That's why when people leave treatment, they get high again. There's nobody there handling them. The conditioning has to come from here because the conditions outside of treatment is not going to change. People are going to still peddle drugs. The tavern is still open. Liquor stores still stay. Nobody's shutting all that down because you got a problem. See, the conditions on the outside will never change. Ever since somebody stepped on that grape, it's been addiction. And it will continue to be drugs, I believe, in this natural realm. And until this is changed, there's nothing that geographical relocations, disassociation with certain people, because the problem is centered in the mind. And so they keep going at it from a natural, you know, in the course of a day, a real drug addict, I'm talking about the one that honestly wants to stop, but he can't. In the course of a day, you know how many times he possibly says in his mind, I'm sick of this, I'm tired of this is killing me. And from the outside looking in, everything always looked different. And so Nancy Reagan and her husband Ronald, bless their hearts, they thought that they really come up with a good idea when they stuck a sign up and say, just say no. You know how many times a real drug addict says that in the course of a day? It's a feeling of impending doom that takes place. You begin to disassociate yourself from life. You don't go around people who's elevating, because low self-esteem and guilt and shame, even resentment step in. You're walking, your friends are driving new cars, you're not working, they're getting jobs, or your appearance is that of a derelict, and they're standing there neatly dressed and smelling good. So you start hanging around people who were just like you. And your whole world begins to shrink. So much so that you even begin to think that everybody gets high. Simply because everybody in your world gets high. And so you're stuck in this vicious cycle, and we live in a country whether people want to accept it or not, where weaknesses are capitalized off of. If you gamble, we set up the boat. If you have a tobacco problem, we sell you cigarettes. You got a sex problem, we got dating services. We got a lot of disguised names we use for prostitution. It's made so easy to get into it now, you don't even have to leave home. You can get on the internet and get excited without leaving the house. Any weaknesses, if you're overweight, we got all type of stuff that we'll sell you that will not work, but people capitalize off of it. So addiction is the same thing. We set up all these different treatment centers, charge you all this money, knowing, I don't know where they get their numbers from, but the last time I did a little investigation on it, I think they said it was like 22% of the people that go to treatment actually recover. 22%. It's a business. It's a cold-blooded, calculated, unfeeling, uncaring business. You cannot solve a spiritual problem with natural solutions.
Well, Sebamurti, that was a great opening statement, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it was.
I think that was powerful.
Very powerful.
He said, you cannot solve a spiritual problem with natural solutions.
Let me thank you for having me on the show, Dr. Peace. And he said a lot of things that were very interesting and very true, very factual. The problem, what's being called a spiritual problem, is interesting because although addiction is problematic, it's not a central problem. It's more of a symptom. So as you try to treat the addiction, you're not going to solve the causal problem. The causal problem is what you said right at the beginning of the program, arrested development. That's the problem. And it manifests in express form and behavior as addiction. And wherever there is arrested development, it cannot be solved by man-made solutions that are arising out of the intellectual mind, along which is so much of what you see in these treatment facilities. It has to be resorted to a higher power. And this is what eliminates that problem. And it's arrested development is the problem because human development must go through stages of cultural maturation and spiritual evolution. And the cultural maturation covers the ethical, moral conduct, and the development of intellectual abilities. Your culture is what develops your consciousness. They cannot be disconnected one from the other. And then the spiritual evolution, the spiritual development is what illuminates that consciousness and allows for it to make contact with that which we are calling and referring to as the divine God. It is that power which eliminates the problem of arrested development. And wherever we have forms of arrested development, you're going to see a variety of forms of addiction, just as Pastor Johnson so rightly analyzed and spoke about how so many people do not even know and not aware of the forms of addiction that they have with prescription drugs, taking these drugs to go to sleep, to try to stop eating, just to try to do normal things, natural things we're supposed to be able to do during the course of just a natural way of living. But if your development has been arrested because we are living under conditions that are not really being guided by an authentic sense of culture, then addictive behaviors is going to form. And problems, a problem is, you have a problem when you're confronted with a challenge and you find yourself inadequate or ill-equipped without knowledge of the tools to overcome that challenge, that's when you have a problem. And if that problem requires immediate resolution and you find yourself unable to resolve it, then physical discomfort, emotional and psychological discomfort is going to be what you experience. And if you find yourself unable to tolerate those levels of discomfort, which most people cannot, then you're going to turn to someone or something for some form of temporary relief from that. And any kind of search outside of oneself for that resolution to that problem is going to lead to dependency and ultimately addiction. And this is what you see that's running rapid in communities all over the world, where people are suffering from arrested development. Addiction is the symptom. It's problematic. But if we try to deal with addiction, just as the pastor spoke of in these treatment centers, without getting at the problem of the arrested development, then the problem will still remain. And the manifest form of it as symptoms in the behavior will just continue on. It will take on a new face of something else.
Right.
It'll switch over from one addiction to another addiction to another addiction, and the person will find themselves being constantly unfulfilled, miserable. And interesting enough, from the highest spiritual perspective as it relates to addiction, the problem, which is the rest of development, is this self, this individual selfish self that we are identified with, that must be crucified. And we must be reborn again in our real identity, who we really are, come to know thy true self. And that illumination will eliminate that problem. And this can only happen when you are under the guidance of an authentic culture. And there's so many problems existing within Western society because technically Western society does not have operating an authentic culture. Arrested development is the problem and addiction is the symptom.
I think that we should also, elaborate on the meaning of culture, because most people think of culture as arts, as dance, as the symphony, as some sort of fine art where people who have great breeding and education and money engage in various social activities for their own aggrandizement. When we're talking about culture here, we're talking about a way of life.
Right.
And that means everything, not just your entertainment, but it is the way that you live, the way that you raise your children, the things that you eat, the things that also including the things that you don't do, the things that you value, and the things that you, don't give your attention to. Right. Would you want to say more about, because culture sometimes gets lost in its popular definition.
Right, right. And there are a few working definitions that I like to bring into a focus whenever I talk about culture. One of them is culture is a process which gives people a general design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. And that culture has three dimensions. There's a causal dimension, there's a subtle dimension, and there's a gross dimension. And most people are only familiar with the gross dimension, the food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, and even the language that you speak, All of that is at the gross dimension. Even the so-called forms of worship that you take on and how it is expressed, we come in contact with the gross dimension of it. The subtle dimension is the worldview and the ethos. And the causal dimension above that of culture, it gets into some kind of rather sophisticated words, but nevertheless, this is where it all begins. The ontology, the cosmology, the axiology, which as you spoke of, the values and the perspectives, and the epistemology, all of this is culture. Whereas with ontology, you're dealing with the nature of reality. In cosmology, the structural relationships of the universe. And axiology, perspectives and values, which help to guide the social order of community and living relationships. In epistemology, knowing, how do you know and what do you know? And then the pedagogical teaching systems that is connected with that knowing. All of this makes up a people's culture, and it gets expressed in these three levels. And when you're not connected to a right perspective of cosmology, ontology, if what you think is real is only that which you can touch and feel, that which is concrete, that which is material, and if the values that you have, if you feel that being wealthy means that you own something, things that you can own and possess, money, material things, then, or instead of health and well-standing, good standing in the community and your family, all of these things make up culture. And authentic culture connects you with nature in a way whereas you feel organically connected to everything in the universe, because that is the reality of it, how things are. And it does not create this individuated self that many of us identify with, which I said is the problem that arrests our development and disconnects us from the spirit and see ourselves as this ego personality. Me, I got to get mine against what you're going to get yours. And this Western society is producing this type of psychic in people, which necessarily is going to lead to dependency and addiction. So culture exists on these three levels, and a human being must be guided by everything that exists on these levels to be connected by an authentic culture. And we don't realize how much we're suffering from not being guided by these three levels of culture. But if we look in our lives and see how we are trying to cope with the pain of our existence and not having that knowledge, then we'll see that we're addicted in so many different ways. Everything that we do is addictive and maladaptive because it's centered in a not knowing of who we are and not being able to connect with the spirit because we identify with a false sense of self, which, as the pastor also mentioned, that self cannot change anything. Will not. It has to surrender, submit. Actually, it has to be obliterated for the true self to emerge and solve
It has to be broken.
all problems.
It definitely has to be broken. I mean, it's just like the problem to me is just like looking at my hand. It's clear to me now that it definitely is a spiritual problem. And it's like your brother was saying, we have gotten away from, especially us as black people, we've gotten away from our culture. The center of the black culture was the church at one time. Even a lot of our Islamic brothers was raised in the church. They got away from it because of what has happened to it. It's been distorted. And there are things that take place on a greater level that these two line bubbles cannot connect with, that this brief intellectual level we have cannot connect with, but they do exist. I'm not talking about anything spooky. I don't even believe in religion. I don't deal with it as I continue to study the Bible. I believe the Bible. I practice living by it. I see how it was gone against. But if you say, I've got a problem here, let's just say it's smoking cocaine, and I see that this thing is destroying my health, is destroying my finances, my material wealth. It has made my name mud. All of my relationships, people don't want to be bothered with me, and I'm through with it. But there's something that causes me to continue on in it, even though I have all this information against it. But it's something that exists that continues to convince me that I can do it one more time. And whenever I set myself up against it, and with everything that I have within me naturally to go against it, I've even come to the point of crying about it. Whenever I reach that state where I said I'm done and I mean it, somebody will offer me some, I'll find some, or some type of way it'll be set up to where I can have access to this thing once again. And you can ask any drug addict about this, and you will not find one that will not be able to tell you about situations such as that taking place whenever they reach the point of saying, I'm done. If one or two people said, yes, it happened to me, we could call that a coincidence. But everybody, all you have to do is say, I'm fasting today. And you act like you can't stand it. There's something that we think arises up out of ourselves that try to convince us not to. We think it comes up out of ourselves, but it's not. And that same, you call it what you want to, but that same existence will bring an individual to the point of being afraid of himself. So much so, he becomes frantic. And he began to make moves that if you or I sit back and watch him, a drug addict now, who's trying to fight this thing off, he doesn't know what it is, but he knows it exists. And so much so that he's afraid of himself. He's scared because he's come to the point of knowing that nobody has to do anything to him. He'll knock himself off. He won't feed himself. He won't keep himself clean. He won't pay his rent. He's afraid of himself now. So he began to make moves to try to go against himself. But every way he goes, he got to take him with him. So he does things. If you sit back and watch him, to you it doesn't make sense. But to him, it makes sense. He'll take his shoe off because he got money in his pocket. He said, listen, I got to get home with this money. I'm not spending this on drugs. So he takes his shoe off and puts his money in his shoe from himself. Now, to you or I, that looks crazy because he's the one who took his shoe off and put it in there. All he had to do is take it back off and get it out. Takes his money to other people and explain to them, keep this for me. And no matter what I say to you, don't give it to me. That's a man that's trying to make it known that it's me that's killing me and I need some help against me. See? And until the mind is changed, you can do all, listen. And you cannot, emotional appeal is nothing. We love you. You come from a good family. You wasn't raised like that. He'll cry with you, only to get up. And this existence that has this hold on him that he cannot see, He'll step right out and do it again. And people keep trying to see. One thing about intelligence, I think it's a great thing when it's used along the guidelines of God's will. But when it becomes self-sufficient, when it becomes the beginning and the end of a human being, to where he thinks that this is the answer to everything that comes my way, it's dangerous. Because so much pride and ego gets involved in that till it will not admit failure. We have a prime example right today of how intelligence won't admit when it's at fault. And so when it runs up against something that it can't handle, it makes excuses for what's going on rather than to say, I don't know how to handle this. Until we get back to what our original position was, and especially the black culture. At one time, just from having, and I'm talking about before it got distorted and turned to all this hustlerism. If I did something wrong on the block, at the other end of the block, whoever was down there, I would get a whooping. Corrected. I would get corrected. Then I would get brought home and get corrected again. And whenever my father got home, I would get corrected again. See, correction, being corrected was a way of life. It was a part of the culture. If Aunt Susie and Uncle Ned broke up and Aunt Susie didn't have anywhere to stay and we stayed in a cracker box, somebody would have to move over. It was a whole different mindset that had us anchored. We've gotten away from it. We live by senses now. Everything is quick, instant grits. You walk around with the phone hanging off your ear. You don't even have to dial it. Everything is quick and fast, even funerals. You drive through, hurry up and cry, look on the screen because we got another one coming. So there's no human involvement in anything. And we've gotten away from our culture, and that spiritual connection is broken. It's every man for himself now. And so we got a spiritual problem here, and nobody's spiritually connected. Everybody wants to work with it from here, and it ain't working.
Right. And we are spiritual people.
That's right.
All people are spiritual people, but we are very expressively spiritual people. And it's another side to addiction as it relates to spirituality, whereas there are natural occasions where we are supposed to have peak experiences and epiphanies. That's a part of the human experience. A climax experience, heightened aesthetic feelings is supposed to be a part of our natural development. And art, music, song, dance, meditation, the ultimate, and even some forms of sport allow for the natural peak experience, the aesthetic experience. And when we are not utilizing our energies or turning in the direction of art, music, dance, and song, which is not just forms of entertainment, then we're going to turn to artificial means to have that peak experience. We're supposed to be feeling high, natural high. And for people who are dominated and oppressed and constantly deprived of natural viable outlets to give expression so that you can reach those natural peaks, then such a people become highly vulnerable to the turning of artificial means for reaching those peaks. So it's like a double-sided coin when you're dealing with addiction. On one side, there is escape and flight from the pain of discomfort, of physical, emotional, psychological, that exists because of a problem that you cannot tolerate, and you want to anesthetize yourself from that pain, give yourself some temporary relief. a lot of people go into drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, a variety of forms of addiction through that route. And then there are other people who seek to have that natural peak and epiphany experience. And epiphany is the radiance of the spirit, that glow. And we all seek this naturally because that's a part of our self-discovery. It's a natural thing that's a part of our experience. But if we are not resorting to the natural means to have that, of which meditation is the ultimate, then we're going to turn toward artificial means. And some people want to get high and have a peak and an epiphany experience through artificial means, and will turn to drugs. So it's like a double-sided coin, this whole addiction.
But this is always something exterior, something out there that you have to get. And then you get it, and you're still not satisfied. I can't get no satisfaction. So there's not enough. You can't satiate your appetite because there's not enough drugs in the whole world to finally be enough. I had a friend once who said that she just thought she had a problem with alcohol. She thought if she just wanted to have one drink, just one drink. But she could never have one drink because one drink so dulled her mind that she could not reason that a second drink was outside of what she had already promised herself.
Yeah.
So I think there's also that factor too, that when people are using external means in order to feel joy or to feel the epiphany, that eventually the external means so dulls the very senses that you are trying to stimulate.
That's right.
That you can't discriminate. You can't reason. You know, how is a drug addict going to reason beyond knowing that he's in bad shape? How is he going to reason himself out of it? The drugs have already arrested his mind.
Exactly.
His mind is on lockdown.
You know what, doctor, though? Let me say this. It's like the brother kept saying, that the drugs is the symptom. Okay. Now, any person that's addicted, whatever the symptom is, like he was saying, whether it's gambling, sex, or whatever, here's what has already taken place within their existence to a high level. All of those people are professional liars. Lying has become a way of life.
Deception. Yeah.
They use lies to live by. And once that takes place on a regular basis, you lose the ability to know the truth from the false. You wouldn't know the truth if it walked up on you with an ID card. And once you go into that area where the mind has been darkened, you can come up and convince yourself of stuff that's not even real. I've seen people walking around weighing 130-something pounds, dying from malnutrition, from using drugs, and telling themselves that they were slim and trim, and believing it. See, you've already gone into an area where now you can convince yourself of stuff that's not real. Long before you pick up a drug, long before you start gambling, it's a conditioning of disconnecting with the truth. And God is the truth. See? And the truth can show up from many different positions. See, well, I didn't get this at church. Okay, I didn't say you did. I say it's the truth. And God is the truth. The truth don't stand off to the side by itself. See? God is the truth. That's why once you accept the truth and walk in it, it makes you free. People who smoke cigarettes, if you ask one of them, do you smoke to catch cancer? They'll tell you no. Do you bleed and catch cancer? Yeah. They smoke because they set up something in their mind to convince themselves of something that's not true. Well, I ain't going to catch cancer. Why? Because I smoke cools. I ain't going to catch cancer because I only smoke 1 cigarette a day. See, I have to be able to deceive myself in the first place in order to enter into somewhere that I know is detrimental to me. The problem is set up long before. Listen, anybody who can sleep with somebody and don't know who that is, with the conditions we have now called AIDS, is unconscious. But they look at the individual and say, oh, she don't have AIDS. How you know? Look at all that jewelry she got on, and she's driving a Lexus. See, I got to already be able to lie. I'm out of touch with the truth already. So now, it ain't just sex. Now I can enter into drugs. I can enter into gambling. I can enter into. Let me tell you something. Now, when you get in line at the lottery place, they got a sign up there. I don't know the exact wording, but it tells you 1 out of so many million people is going to win. You got a line full of people, and everybody says that's them. And everybody believes in their mind that it's them. But we all know that somebody's lying. How could it be everybody? The guy in the front says it's him, the guy behind him. And it's the same way when you go to the boat. People get a gamble. You got what they call billionaires. Now, in order to get that title, you got to have a knowledge of how to handle money, right? You got these people come together, set this boat up. You have conditioned your mind to where you're going to go on this boat. Here they got billions of dollars. You got $40. Here they got a knowledge of handling money that you don't have a clue about, but you're going to break them. Now, when you step on that boat and you pull your money out, you got something called legal tender there. I tell you it's legal tender. You can spend that money anywhere in the world. But once you step on that boat and give them that money, they give you some coins that once you get off the boat with them coins, that's dead. You got to stay on that boat in order for that money to be alive. And everybody on that boat believe that they coming out of there a winner. And I guarantee you, everybody that goes on that boat that's addicted to it is already a high-level liar. Already. They live by lies. That's where the unconsciousness come in. That's what the disconnection is. The disconnection is with the truth. It tells you right on the side of the pack of cigarettes, these will kill you. You got all the information that an individual who will receive the truth is right there on the side of the pack. And if you can receive that truth, you'll throw those away. That's the condition.
It's interesting because the pathology of it all originates at a social level, and then it funnels down. It's a collective psychic pathology that is socially institutionalized, but it funnels through the individual psychic of people within the society that's growing up under adverse conditions that are not natural to human development. As we're developing, fundamental needs that nurture our development in the proper order so that we can fully mature at the physical, emotional, and psychological levels. We need love. We need attention. We need belonging, feel belonged, and we need power. And when you are growing up within a society that has as its agenda the domination and control, an elite people dominating small people, dominating and controlling the masses of people, then there's not going to be feelings of love, power. You're not going to have that experience. And when that is not undergone as you are growing, then you're going to start engaging in forms of deception to try to solicit that, even if it means concocting things that you know are not true, because you're doing this for some form of attention. All behavior is attention and goal directive. You're doing it for some form of attention. the fundamental, most basic and powerful feeling that we need and energy that we need is love. And when we're made to feel that we're not loved, then it's hard. Just taking a specific example, with us as African people here in America, how have we been made to feel that we belong here? Have we had experiences of love? What kind of attention has been given to us, special attention, to keep us in a certain place? And what kind of power do we really have? What kind of assured sense of power do we have? Power, meaning that you have an ability to adapt and bring about changes in your conditions in spite of opposition and resistance. That's real power. If you don't have power, if you're not being loved, if you're feeling like you're not belong, then naturally, because these are things that you're supposed to have, naturally you're going to start turning to ways of deception. Natural behavior cannot flow from people living under unnatural conditions. And so you're going to see all of that, and it's going to manifest as symptoms and forms of addictions. The problem is not going to be solved until we take out all of those operants that are creating the arrested development of human beings, such as racism and a lot of other antisocial elements that we are forced to live under.
As I listen to you, a lot of things come to mind regarding this whole notion of love, because love is bastardized in the West. We don't know we're loved unless it has material connection. You know, a woman knows she's loved when she is given things. If she isn't given material things, then it's hard for her to prove to herself or to her friends that she is loved. And the same thing for others who are not female. When you think about childbirth, you know, when a child is born, the first thing that ought to be done is that it needs to bond with its parents, with its mother and with its father. But what is happening is that people are giving birth in hospitals, and the children are being taken away and put into sterile, cold environments all by themselves with no sense of belonging, no sense of attachment to another human being. And then, of course, the drugs are introduced right there because they claim they have to, you know, give an inoculation, and they claim they have to put drugs in their eyes to ward off blindness. So you get the first dose of drugs right immediately upon birth. And then, of course, mothers these days don't tend to breastfeed their children. So the child doesn't feel, again, isn't feeling like it belongs to anyone, he or she belongs to anyone, or that it is loved. And it's quite true that it can't get a sense of belonging or being loved without actually being loved and belonging. We say, even when we send a card or give congratulations, we say, it's a boy. What do you mean, it's a boy? He's a son. She's a daughter. So we call our children it, we call them kids, and, you know, we sometimes call them other names that shouldn't be said in public. But the point is that even though we can say that about the society that oppresses us, where hatred of us and envy toward us as a people is rampant, we can say that about the society. We don't do much better as a community in terms of our loving each other and our showing our love for each other in ways that are not necessarily material, but in ways which reassure us that we are not alone and that we do not have to suffer, and that there are people like yourselves who are willing to illuminate the suffering so that we can end it.
And I think once again, you know, I believe more in what I don't see than what I do see, and sometimes it gets misjudged. But all that you were saying about that connection, if the parents are not conscious, then they don't have that to give. And when that connection that in our culture is broken, we don't have it.
That's right.
We try to take on the ways of others that it's not our ways. You know, we watch soap operas and say, I want you to prepare me like they do on such and such and such. We don't do that. We don't prepare like that.
We have a short time. I don't want to forget to say your location, Reverend Johnson. 4246 West Lake Street. You're doing a wonderful work over there. I've already heard testimony. And I know that you're not using drugs to eliminate drugs. I know that you practice what you preach, and I feel very indebted to you for the work that you're doing in the community. And Sebamurti, I know that it is always your intention to try to bring to any discussion that we have a level we had to reach beyond those things that are familiar to us in order for us to really solve our problems and get rid of the dependency and the addictions that we are not acknowledging in ourselves. You know, we talk about those addicts, but we're not looking at our addiction to this false sense of self that we have, which detaches us from our true selves. I thank you so much, Juane Sebamurti Gentry and Pastor William
Thank you.
Johnson Jr. I'm sure that there will be a lot of response to this, and I certainly hope that you will get a lot more people coming to you for a continuation of the kinds of things you've shared with us today. And certainly soon, SIA Foundation will have workshops that will be able to continue this as well. We're not trying to just have a conversation here. We're really trying to illuminate
Amen.
a problem.
Amen.
Hotep.